wave loading, clusters. But when they do clusters, they need to rest longer between reps. So they use 92% of their maximum, and they shoot for about 5 reps per set. But instead of taking 10 seconds like in a regular cluster, they will take 20 seconds between reps because they cannot build up the fatigue because they don't have that muscular component to it. Any kind of like I mentioned chains, but heavy barbell weight, light chains. When you're designing the workout, the most important thing is keep the volume down. The big thing with the type 1A is that they are super sensitive to dopamine. So when you're training heavy, they get that dopamine rush, they feel indestructible, and the tendency is to do too much work. I'm feeling so good, I want to do more. But because their natural dopamine level is low, it crashes down super fast. And then it's too late and they have workout hangover. So the hardest thing for a coach is to hold these athletes back. Now, one extreme case I work with, super strong guy, like over twice body weight bench press, 225 for 36 reps at a low body weight. The maximum volume you could do in a session was 6 to 9 work sets, not per exercise, for the workout. So if he had 3 lifts, 3 exercises, that's 2 or 3 work sets per exercise, that's it. More than that, all his physiological markers showed excessive stress and he was not recovering properly. So very low volume. They don't need variation, right? As long as they have intensity, like 90% plus weight, they don't need to change the movement. What they need is the intensity, not the variation. That's why if you're an Olympic weightlifter who use a Bulgarian type of training will do our type 1A, because they go to 90% plus every workout, they do low volume sessions lasting 40 minutes, and they don't change exercises. So that would be an example. So that's how they should train. Longer rest intervals. They don't want adrenaline to be released during training. Why? Because adrenaline is produced from dopamine. These guys are dopamine dominant, meaning that they're very sensitive to dopamine, but they have very little of it, right? So if you overproduce adrenaline, you are taking that dopamine to produce the adrenaline, and then you crash and you can't train. You have no motivation anymore, and you feel drunk the next day. So that's why they need very long rest intervals to be able to perform well. As far as deloading, when they are deloading, there are 2 mistakes to avoid. The first mistake is decreasing the frequency. Right? These guys need to train very often to get that dopamine rush. So if I'm cutting their frequency to 3 training sessions per week, for example, they will come back weaker. Because those off days don't give them their dopamine rush. What will happen, they will try to get it other ways. They will go ride a motorcycle 200 miles an hour. They will go do an extreme sport. They will take drugs. They will binge eat. They will go see 3 mistresses. They will go skiing when they don't know how to ski. Just doing crazy stuff. Or they might get arrested. Like that's why you see a lot of pro football players who should be smart in that get arrested for doing crazy stuff. That's because they need that dopamine rush. So the worst thing to do when deloading is to cut the frequency. The second worst thing is decreasing the relative intensity. Now, here's a difference between relative intensity and absolute. Relative is how much weight am I using on a movement versus my maximum on that movement. So like 90%, like let's say I'm deadlifting 100 kilos, that's my maximum. Well, using 90 kilos is 90% in relative intensity. Now, if I'm talking about absolute intensity, it's how much weight I'm loading the body with. So for example, instead of I'm going from 90% to 80% on my deadlift to deload, which is a mistake because the relative intensity is lowered by 10% and they don't want that, a better alternative is to go with a movement that forces you to use less weight, but you can still push it to 90%. So instead of doing a regular deadlift, you do a deficit deadlift, or a snatch grip deadlift, or a deadlift without straps or with double overhand grip. So you can't use as much weight as on your regular deadlift, but you can still work to 90%, 95% of that movement. So if I'm going to 90% of my deficit deadlift, I might be using 70 pounds less than my normal deadlift. So the absolute intensity is lower, but my relative intensity stays at 90%. That's what the Bulgarian lifters do. When they want an easy day, instead of going lighter, they do power snatches. So normally on their heavy days, they do work up to a maximum on snatch. And when they want to deload or have an easier day, they work up to a max on a power snatch. So they will be using about 15–20% less weight, but it's still a max effort on that movement. It's just a lesser amount relative to how much their body is able to handle. Remember, they are neurodominant. So it's not so much about the range of motion they are working with, it's about how much tension is placed on the body. So these are some cool guidelines when training a 1A athlete.